Hello, Templeton. Welcome to Question Time. I'm Steve Castle with Templeton Community Television. With me today is Carter Terenzini, the Templeton Town Administrator. And Carter, why Question Time?
Well, this is something that I've done before each of the town meetings. And I got the idea from actually watching British Parliament one time, where the Prime Minister had to rise up and get pushed and prodded by the other members as to why the government was taking certain actions and requesting approval of certain actions. And it just seemed like a good way to tee up an informative session about the upcoming town meeting.
Mm-hmm. And let's talk about that. We're having a fall town meeting. You want to explain what that entails?
Sure. The statute actually calls for annual town meetings and special town meetings, the idea being that over the course of the year there may be some things that pop up given our form of government. But many towns have taken to calling this a fall town meeting because, in fact, they have one every year. And so there's nothing really special about it, if you will. When I went to the town of Spencer, Mass., they were having 8, 9, and in some cases 10 meetings a year as they lurch from crisis to crisis. But after we were able to get some things calmed down, we actually got it down to where we had 2 meetings a year. The annual town meeting that's held every May. And then we had the fall town meeting. And the idea is to try to send a signal that, in many, as I say, communities are using this reference, that it's a pretty normal course of events, given the form of government that we have, where the select board has certain things it can do, but it has many things it can't do. And it's simply not possible to run a community with just one legislative session a year. Mm-hmm. And so that's the reasoning behind this, to some, new name.
Mm-hmm. And we can also get some budgetary housekeeping in order.
Yeah, exactly. In many communities, the state aid might not have been fully known when the budget was adopted. But as I say, in this unique form of government that we have here in Templeton and many communities across the state, there are a number of things that the Select Board cannot do. They cannot transfer money between accounts if that's needed. They cannot make new appropriations if those are needed. They can't adopt statutes. They can't adopt bylaws. They can't adopt zoning. Mm-hmm. If you look at many of the communities around us, they've had a number of questions related to zoning. So it's pretty common that at least one second legislative session is needed during the course of the year to handle those things that the Select Board simply cannot mm-hmm. legislate on its own.
Mm-hmm. I understand. And so you want to run through the articles? And the town meeting, by the way, is November 14th at 7 p.m.?
Yeah, it's November 14th, 7 p.m. In the auditorium of the middle school on Baldwinville. Now, you can't just show up that night. I do want to try to get that out front and center. You do need to be a registered voter. The deadline to register in the offices of the town clerk will be 8 p.m. on Thursday evening, November 2nd. She'll be staying open late. And we do want to encourage as many people as possible to register so that they can participate in this open town meeting. And it's the purest form of government. It's where any citizen can show up and ask any question and make any motion that they wish within the confines of the statute. Unlike communities where representatives show up and conduct the business, or there's a town council or a city council, this really is the quintessential New England form of government, mm-hmm. this open town meeting.
What they call the purest form of democracy, and the people decide the articles.
They do, and we're hopeful that this will get some information out to them on what the issues are, and we'll encourage them towards the end. We'll talk about alternative ways they can get some additional information or ask questions that may come to mind after today's show.
All right, are we ready to go through the articles?
At your pleasure. Yes, sir.
Okay, so Article 1 is the General Operating Budget Deficits Resolution. Can you tell us a little bit about this,
Sure.
please?
As most people know, the community did not have financial audits from fiscal 2013 right up through fiscal 2017. And we did those in two groupings. We were able to do fiscal 13 through fiscal 16. And we've recently completed the field work on fiscal 17. For those who had an opportunity to attend the special presentation that the town's auditor made up at the middle school, and I think that's still available on Templeton
It is on
Television.
TCT TV YouTube channel.
Yeah. So they can always watch that. It's also posted on the web. But we had in fiscal 2013, 2014, and 2015, for a variety of reasons, the software that held all the accounting records was converted, switched from one software program to another at the tail end of fiscal 13. That conversion did not, in kindest terms, go well. And a lot of the data was lost. You then had subsequently some pretty serious turnover, a lot of churn in the accounting staff. And those records had to be constructed to a great deal from scratch. And the auditor found, and this is on page 10 of their management letter in that report that we presented, and that's available on the town's website, templeton1.org, that between 13, 14, and 15, the town overspent a number of accounts. It wasn't a matter of bad will on anyone's part. Simply, they honestly didn't know what they'd spent, and so they continued to spend in some areas. So there's two amounts that have been overspent. There are these department by department line item deficiencies. And then in another part of the auditor's report, it's a little bit on the snow and ice. It's the one thing you can legally spend on. So this is going to take a portion of our certified free cash and clean up all these deficits. Now this is, for the most part, a technical accounting issue. It's not new spending. It's old spending that's already been done. And we're using free cash, which has been certified by the state as being available to clean up these deficits. And interestingly enough, once the deficit goes away, that cash that we're appropriating actually rolls over and becomes free cash for the next year. So this is the cleanup plan. We spoke about it at the audit presentation. We spoke about it on a number of occasions since then. This must happen before we set our tax rate for this year. DOR will not set a tax rate until we do this. I want to make sure people understand that DOR, the Department of Revenue, the Massachusetts entity which oversees our finances, has indicated that this issue has to be resolved this year one way or the other. It's either through an appropriation like this, or it's through being put on what we call the tax recap sheet. And you can't just add it to the recap sheet. We would then have to cut the budget by this amount. So we're hopeful that with some additional information we can get out to folks. With the information that we've gotten out there, folks will understand the need and will approve this article.
Now, are these deficits detailed for people? They'll know what it entails?
We'll have that as part of a package of summaries and material that we're going to put together. It'll be at the back end so they can see line item by line item but the Department of Revenue agreed that for the purposes of legislative action, putting them together was an agreeable way to proceed.
I see. So Article 2, moving on to the Sewer Fund Operating Budget Deficit Resolution. Why is this here?
Well, in fiscal 2015, there was apparently an error in the budget document, and somehow the sewer department was not charged for all of its various health insurance, dental insurance, life insurance, a number of the fringe benefits. Now, the sewer is what we call an enterprise fund. It's meant to be run like a business, where the revenues raised from the users cover all of the expenses. So this was a deficit in fiscal 2015 and would be paid back with this transfer. Now interestingly, the state calls monies that are available for expenditure on the general fund side free cash. But when we get to the enterprise funds, they call it retained earnings. And the difference is to try to reflect the phrase earnings, the fact that it's more like a business. This cash also, once it is done, actually flows back to the sewer department in next year's retained earnings as well. Again, an accounting issue. It's not new money. It's already been spent. It's just cleaning up this deficit that existed on the balance sheet.
And at the end of the fiscal year, the retained earnings are certified, and then
they are. This state, most states, it's called undesignated fund balance. This state is, I believe, the only one in the nation that uses this process, whereby September, October, as we've had the field work done on the audit, we submit our balance sheet to the state, and they look at what our undesignated fund balance is. And then they look at anything that's perhaps in transit, open questions, an account that doesn't look balanced, a liability that we have, and they certify officially our free cash or our retained earnings. And only after it has been certified by the Massachusetts Department of Revenue is it available for expenditure.
So Article 3, late bills.
Well, this is something that we certainly try to avoid as much as possible. Departments must get all of their bills into the accounting office by roughly July 15. That's the last time that we pay the bills for a prior fiscal year. If they know they order something on the 20th of July, they know that that particular supplier perhaps cuts its billing off on the 15th of the month. They know they're not going to get the bill in time. They can encumber the money. That is, they can say, I ordered this. Here's what the amount's going to be. Bill's not going to come through in time. I want to hold some money over. That's an encumbrance. And we had two bills, one for $50-something and one for $12 that simply didn't make it through that process in time. Legally, we cannot pay that without town meeting approval. They will be paid out of the current budgets of the department, and we need a 9/10 vote of the town meeting to do that.
And is that because the previous budget has already been audited and certified?
Previous budget has been closed. Whether it's been audited or not, that's simply a cutoff. We cannot forevermore pay bills out of one fiscal year once we've closed that fiscal year.
Okay. Now, Article 4 is completing the FY 2018 planned revenue transfer, and this involves the ambulance receipts.
It does.
Right?
It does. Just prior to the annual town meeting, we had a visit from the Department of Revenue. They wanted to go through all of our revenue projections to feel comfortable that they were reasonable, that we weren't building a budget on the basis of revenue estimates that we couldn't achieve. As the revenue for the ambulance service comes in, it's put in a segregated account. It's set off, and it's reserved for future appropriation. Well, interestingly, this is the very first year, as a result of this visit, where the DOR said, how much is in the account? And we told them it was about $225,000 at that time, and we had projected the use of $325,000. And they said, oh no, you don't have the money in the bank, so you can't appropriate it. You can only appropriate what you have in the account at the time. The town has been using this other method ever since it created these reserved for appropriation account. And so we had two choices at that point. The first was to cut the fire department budget by $100,000 and then increase the budget and transfer the balance of the money at the fall town meeting. And the second was to leave the budget intact as it was and to explain to the advisory committee and the annual town meeting. This budget is short by this $100,000. But by the time we get to the fall town meeting, we will have enough receipts that have come in and will cover it. And in fact, that's happened. This cycle will probably take 2 or 3 years to work your way through because when you converted to the advanced life support system, you didn't have enough cash in the bank to cover all your expenses. So this is one that we've talked about, and I'm hopeful that folks will remember that conversation at the annual town meeting, and we can move forward. Because our only option here, if this does not pass, would be to actually cut the fire department budget by this $100,000.
Article 5 is FY18 operating budget backfill. That sounds like it needs heavy equipment. I couldn't.
Actually, some of it is for equipment. So when we built the annual town meeting warrant and we built the budget to present, there were a couple of assumptions. Budgets are only as good as the assumptions that they're based upon. The first was that in acquiring some new lawnmowers, tractors for the cemetery and the ball fields and everything else, it was assumed we'd be trading in the old equipment. After a meeting with the Inspector General, which spoke to the best way to dispose of surplus equipment, and looking at the overall best use of the equipment, Mr. Mayo, Alan Mayo, determined that it was probably going to be better to retain these, scavenge them for parts, and sell them at auction next spring. So it was about $2,500 short, and he spent that money out of his supply account to cover the expense at that time. So what we're trying to do is to put the money back into his supply account. On the highway department, it had been hoped that we would buy a dump body for one vehicle. This was being done partly with some town money and partly with some good help from the light department. Unfortunately, over the long winter, and you start preparing a budget in December, you actually finalize it by late March, and you get it approved in May. And for equipment, especially for equipment as old as what we have, there can be some really dramatic changes between December and June, July, when that budget goes into effect. So the dump body on that truck deteriorated dramatically, as did the truck, and several of the sanders that were used for our snow and ice efforts in the winter deteriorated beyond repair. And so what the highway department proposed was, instead of replacing the dump body, that they buy 2 used sanders. We went out to bid. We were able to get a couple of demonstrator models with a very light usage on them. But we couldn't use the money for the dump body because the town meeting appropriated money for dump body, not for Sanders. So like the mowers, Alan reached into his supply account and make up with that extra money. We're hoping to put that back for him so he has sufficient material to get through the year. Fire and EMS, we actually dramatically increased from 2,000 to a little over 10,000, the amount of money that we set aside for the repair of our fire apparatus. We weren't able to get to the 25,000, give or take. We thought should actually be budgeted, but we did make a dramatic increase. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough. And the ladder truck, which last year needed a $25,000 repair to the pumps on it, had an electrical problem develop, which is over $18,000 to repair. The $10,000 budget we had simply was not able to handle it, given other repairs that we had. So this would give the chief enough money to backfill his budget, because again, this is going to have to come out of his budget someplace, which means he can't do all kinds of other things that were planned. Finally, the treasurer collector. The budget for fiscal 18 thought that the deputy collector would retire in fiscal 17 and would use up all their vacation in 17, and we constructed a budget for 18 based upon that theory. However, the treasurer collector resigned in mid-April. So the first thing that happened, we had to say to the deputy collector, can we get you to adjust your retirement plans? We need to, one, not have you take vacation this year prior to June 30th, because we need you in the office, because the treasurer collector has resigned. You're the other full-time person. If you take your vacation, we're only going to be able to keep the office open a few hours a day. So they had quite a bit of vacation that they carried into fiscal 18. And we were not able to get the position of treasurer collector filled in fiscal 17. So July 1 came around, and the deputy treasurer collector earned another year's worth of vacation. So when you put together what they weren't able to take in 17 because of the staff shortage, and then you add the amount of vacation that they accrue July 1 of every year, it is a pretty substantial hit. That wasn't in the budget. We don't have a reserve funds. Many communities keep a reserve for sick leave buyouts, vacation buyouts when people retire. And so this is to cover that. The alternative would be to simply close the office many more hours during the course of this year so that we aren't paying the part-time staff. And then we can try to somehow figure our way through it. These are one-time events, all of them, which is why we're using this one-time money, this free cash, to cover it. These will not happen again.
Now, just quickly, because I want to move forward with this, but it seems we always get stuck on truck parts and trucks and fire apparatus. And is this normal for a community to always be needing heavy equipment?
Well, let me say that the age of your fleet is much older than most communities I've worked with. I read an interesting article by Harry Ulrich, I believe, who was your highway foreman back in the day, that spoke to the fire, I guess in the mid-90s, at your highway garage, and quite a bit of equipment that was destroyed, not replaced back then. And the town has not been able to develop and fund a good capital plan. So while many communities are able to replace to plan, that's a phrase that I've used, where they have a plan and they replace equipment every so many years. Here in Templeton, because of the both having a set of unsettled books for 5 years, and then having other fiscal constraints, we've been on a work-to-failure approach. It's very expensive, but I would say that you are probably amongst the oldest fleets that I've ever seen, and yeah, this creates a lot of problems throughout the course of the year.
Okay, so Article 6, operating budget regarding extraordinary inspection workload, and this involves some of our inspectors, correct?
It does, and it involves the new elementary school. We have a part-time building inspector, and his workload is pretty well set. And then we have our plumbing and gas and our electrical inspectors, who normally are paid out of a revolving fund, a percentage of the permits. Those two systems do not envision the kind of scale that would be involved in this elementary school. They're fine for, when the Dunkin' Donuts gets a new permit, or the Cumberland Farms across the street rebuilds, the single-family home, the deck, the new kitchen, the new roof. But to have a large, fairly complex new building like this, it's just not, we're not geared for that. And so we need to be able to have some monies to pay the building inspector for extra hours, far beyond what he's budgeted for, and to have our inspectors do all of these extra inspections. Now, we're using free cash because this is a one-time event, and this is actually paid for in a different way. The school will buy their building permit. That is greater than $125,000 plus or minus. That goes into the building department's receipts. But we just can't expend from that. We have to have an appropriation. So the revenue comes in on one side, but we have to have an appropriation on the other side. And we'll make similar appropriations out of free cash for the next 2 years as well. But it'd be more than covered by the receipt of that building permit fee.
And Article 7 is capital expenditures, and we see here we've got another dump truck and a boiler replacement.
Well, we do. Ideally we'd have a capital plan, and we'd have all the equipment in there, and we would know every time we're going to replace something, and we'd have financing for it, and we would do it generally in the annual town meeting. In this case, we have become aware that the boiler at the emergency management building over in Baldwinville, just as you cross the bridge, you go past the fire station and you cross the bridge, and it's immediately there on your right.
It's the old fire station there.
It's the old fire station, yep. Is close to failure. There's great concerns that it might not make it through the fall. And the Rich Curtis, emergency management director, did a great job. He was able to get the state to approve a grant, our grant of $2,500 towards this expense. And there was another nearby community that didn't have a plan for their grant, so the state actually agreed to give us that $2,700, $2,750.
That's good news.
Which is good news. So we'll spend those grants first, and then we'll spend out of this what we need to complete it, and that'll replace that boiler and keep that building operational. The six-wheel dump truck is, we have a 1994, 23-year-old vehicle. Originally, we were going to put that body on it that when I was talking with you about the Sanders. But the truck has just had such advanced deterioration. The mechanic's concerned it may not even make it through the winter. Believe it or not, it takes about 7 months to get this kind of vehicle from when you order it until when it's available to you. So the hope is that the legislative body, the town meeting, will appropriate these dollars, and that we can get that truck through the new truck by next spring before this truck fails. And we're hoping that we can get the 1994 through the winter.
I hope so, too. So Article 8 is the permit to permit the application of the bond sale premium to pay project costs. I think a lot of people get confused when it comes to bonds and borrowing, and can you lead us through this?
This is an interesting one. It's a technical one to conform to a change in state statute. And first, there's the concept. When we ask people to lend us money, they fill in basically two blanks. The first blank is what the interest rate's going to be. We'll lend you $5 million for a year at 1.7%, let's say. Then, if you can remember back to when the banks wanted your checking account or your savings account and they gave you a toaster or a blanket or something else, the banks actually offer to give us a premium that they will pay us for the privilege of lending money to us. I've never quite wrapped my head around it, but that is the way it works. And up until this year, you used that premium to first pay off any costs that you had, bond counsel, printing, your financial advisor, your servicing fee. You paid those out of the premium, and generally you had a little bit of money left. And you would use that to write down your principal and interest payment that you made next. Mm-hmm. And they changed the law. They no longer allow you to do that. You have to do one of two things. The first is that at the end of the project, you see how much bond premium's left. And let's say you needed to borrow $1 million and you have $20,000 of bond premium left in the kitty, if you will. Well, you write down what you're going to borrow. You simply borrow $980,000 and you do it all at once. You don't write down the principal and interest payment, you write down how much you borrow. There's a second method of how you can use premiums. I don't want to confuse folks with that. The Select Board determined that the simplest thing, the cleanest thing, was simply to use the premium to reduce borrowing costs. So on the police station, if there's $5,000 of premium left, instead of borrowing $985, we'll borrow $980. This is a technical cleanup, something that we have to do to conform to state statute, and truly there's not much way around this.
Okay. Article 9 is rescission of unauthorized but unissued debt. Of authorized but unissued debt.
Think of this like reducing the limit on your credit card, if you will. So when town meeting votes, they get a request for a bond issue for a sewer project, or in this case, the money was to borrow money from the state to give loans out to help people repair their septic systems. This can be a pretty costly expense. Not uncommon for these systems to run one side or the other of $20,000. So the state floated a massive bond statewide and then lent money out to cities and towns through these bonds that we issued. The Board of Health at that time requested $400,000 for this purpose back in '08, and we borrowed $205,000. The Board of Health has been able to take care of most folks that have come to it, and as these repayments come back in, they actually sit in a fund where we can lend them back out again and again. And they've determined that they do not need the $195,000 that was not borrowed. So this vote basically says, okay, yep, we told you you could borrow $400,000, but we're going to amend that, and we're going to bring this down to $205,000. That's what we actually borrowed. And then the balance sheet shows that we are authorized to borrow $205,000. We borrowed $205,000, and the package that goes to the credit agencies doesn't show them that we have this, we could go out and borrow anyways. So again, this is a fiscal cleanup, supported by the Board of Health, supported by the finance team, and we're certainly hopeful that it gets passed.
Does this tie in with people getting Title V help?
Yeah, this is driven. So Title V is the section of the state regulations that talks about the condition that your home has to be in. So this could be used, perhaps when you go to sell your house, you get a Title V inspection, you find it's failed, you can use these monies to fix it up. These loans are assumable. Or you could just be living in your home and you are out mowing the grass and you notice that there's an area that's particularly lush, very green, but also a little damp when you're walking across it. And you discover that your septic system, in fact, has failed, and you need to get that fixed. So we can help folks. They can come in. They can see the Lori Weta, see the folks in the Development Services Office, which supports the Board of Health, and we can assist you with monies that we do currently have on hand. We don't need these additional monies.
I see. So Article 10 is acceptance of a statute regarding abandoned funds. What's that?
So we have about $32,000 of checks going back as far as 2002 that simply haven't cleared. We have no record of them having cleared. And this money belongs to these people still. So we have two ways to do this. The first is the state's abandoned property program. I don't know if you've ever gone on it. I go to the Secretary of State's abandoned, Secretary of the Treasurer's office, I'm sorry, every couple months, and I type in my name, and I find that some life insurance company, kept a premium, or I overpaid, and I go through and I collect my money. We can turn it over to them. That is something we could do. And there's a process that we have to go through to do that. We have to try to find these people. We have to send them notices and the like. But what the town auditor recommended is there's an alternative method by which, as long as we go through all the steps that are involved, the town gets to keep the abandoned money. And interestingly, the town had done this process a couple of times, but it had done it without accepting the statute.
I see.
So if we accept this statute, it will specify how we have to contact people, what happens if we can't find them, and monies that are not claimed actually become the property of the town. So this will codify what we've already been doing. It's a little easier process than going to the Treasurer's Abandoned Property Program, and anything that isn't claimed at the end of the day becomes a resource for the town.
Okay. Article 11, deposits to stabilization and OPEB accounts, and I know this has been kicking around for some time, or at least the topic of OPEB.
It has. So let's talk about stabilization and OPEB, and I'm going to talk about them separately. The statute allows the town to create what are referred to as stabilization accounts. They're reserve funds in most communities and states. And the theory is that you will put away money such that when an unexpected occurrence comes along, whether it's an economic downturn, massive failure of a piece of equipment, damage to a building where the insurance isn't sufficient to repair it, that you have monies to tap, that you can stabilize your budget, stabilize these outflows, and be ready for an emergency. The town currently has about $100,000, perhaps only $90,000, as I recall it, in its operations stabilization, what we refer to as OPEX, and it has virtually nothing in its capital stabilization funds, what we refer to as CapEx. Now, those are monies that you can use for anything, and they're and they're there in case of emergency. OPEB is other post-employment benefits. So when we hire somebody, we make two kinds of promises to them. The first is we deduct money from their pay, and we promise them that if they stay with us long enough, we will give them a pension, and a pension of a specific amount. We are a member of the Worcester Regional Retirement System, so they calculate all of that and they send us the bill, and that's being dealt with over here. But the other promise that we make people is when you've been with us long enough to retire, we will provide you with health insurance in your retirement. We also offer dental and life insurance in your retirement. And right now that's done on what we call a pay-as-you-go basis. Every year the rates go up, there's more people retired, and we just deal with it in the budget. Well, if everybody who's eligible to retire retires at a given point in time, we're going to have this very large liability. And the state and the Government Finance Accounting Board have laid out a process whereby communities should be calculating what the size of that liability is and how they're going to get to having enough money in the bank so that when that liability comes due and payable, when that person actually retires, the monies are there to pay that insurance. So little by little, communities are starting to set some money aside. Now, as you can imagine, $100,000 in stabilization, $60,000 we've set aside for OPEB to date, pales in comparison to the potential demand on those monies. At the same time, we can't use all of our free cash. We can't cut services to the bone to set this aside. So the selectmen adopted a policy that says when you have free cash every year, we're going to do first, take care of any little bit of snow and ice deficit set aside for the spring, because we always underfund that. And then with what's left, we're going to keep about half of it for cash flow to make sure we have enough in the bank, just like you want to make sure you have enough in the bank so that as the bills come in, you've got the cash there to pay it. And then we're going to take the other half that's left and we're going to put it into these several funds in a given percentage. So this would contribute about $140,000 roughly to the operating stabilization, about $40,000 to the capital stabilization, and about $20,000 to the OPEB reserve. Now, it's not a lot, but it's a start. And the town didn't get in the current financial position overnight, and it is going to take a while to dig out. When I went into one community, we had about $2,000 in the bank. And it took 9 years, but when I left, we had close to $1.5 million in the bank by every year, consistently budgeting in a conservative fashion to make sure we were throwing off as much free cash as possible and sweeping some of it every year into the account. So it's a start. It's going to be a long and slow process, but I think it's a great way to start this fiscal year.
Oh, thank you for explaining that. So Articles 12 and 13 regard zoning bylaw amendments for Baldwinville Road and Patriots Road.
Well, I'm not going to try to speak to these at length. The the best thing to do is for anyone is to go onto our website, templeton1.org, look for this warrant for the fall town meeting, and look at the maps that are attached at the end. And you can always come into the town clerk and see those as well. This is driven by the planning board, and the object is to create a little more commercial property in town to accommodate expansion and what they perceived throughout the master plan as a need for additionally zoned lands for some commercial activity.
Yeah, and the maps are very interesting if you want to take a look at those.
That's really, the lawyer had us list all these parcels, and it takes a lot of space, but it's really not the best way to do it.
Yeah.
I really encourage people to look at the maps. If you're looking at them in color, the parcels that are going to get rezoned are all in yellow, and they've got some cross-hatching across them, so you can they really jump out at you.
It's easy to understand.
Hopefully, yes.
Article 14 is the acquisition of lands for the Walter Fernald Corporation, of the Walter Fernald Corporation, for conservation and passive recreation purposes, and I know the Community Preservation Committee has been working on
They have. This comes to us from the Conservation Commission and the Community Preservation Committee. There's about 100 acres of land out there that they believe contains some important species that they want to protect. A lot of it's wetlands. They want to add to the public open space here in the community. So they're asking for roughly $260,000. It's all coming out of that community preservation money. That's a small surcharge on your real estate bill. The first $100,000 of value is not taxed, but after that, you get about a 3% surcharge of the taxes that you paid. And it can be used for three main purposes. It can be used for this open space and conservation of this one. It can be used for the development of affordable housing, and it can be used for historic preservation purposes. So each annual town meeting, you see the monies that they've gotten kind of get divvied up into these three pots, and then one that's kind of a general account that can be used in any fashion. And then they've applied for what's called a land grant, a local acquisition to support natural diversity. Having been with the state, it's always interesting to see these programs get names so that there's an easy-to-use acronym for them. But if they get that grant, and this expenditure is contingent upon that, they cannot spend the $260 if they don't get the grant of roughly $160,000.
Okay.
That's a reimbursement. So we'll spend the money, get the reimbursement in, and then the reimbursement will go back into the accounts of the Community Preservation Committee in the same proportion as it was withdrawn. Again, I will leave to the CPC to speak to the merits of this article. And I know it's part of a larger plan that they have with Fish and Game and some other things.
Article 15 amends the bylaws regarding the dates of town meeting and the town election every year.
Yeah, this is one that's meant to again, it's I guess this is a little bit more than a housekeeping. Right now, you have the town meeting, you have it on a Saturday, and then you have the town election that precedes that. And there's a couple changes here. The first is that it was noticed that since the change to the Saturday town meeting, we had a Saturday town meeting in my last community, but it was in March, and you didn't necessarily have a lot to do on a snowy day in northern New Hampshire, unless you were a skier or a snowmobiler. But here, it's the end of March, and it's a Saturday, and it's a gorgeous day, and people have yard work, and they want to spend time with their families and such. So it was noticed that attendance actually went down a little bit. So the hope is that going back to a weeknight will bring attendance back up. And then there's the issue of trying to have the election after the town meeting. And there's a couple reasons for that. Right now, you have the election. You get new selectmen. You could get two in any given year, one perhaps. And then that new select board, which didn't necessarily create the warrant, didn't create the budget, has to explain it and defend it. And they have very few days to get familiar with everything. So the idea is to have the election after the town meeting. And that way the folks who sit in this room to our left and create the warrant and know what the budget was created and why it is what it is and what's in it, they are better equipped to explain it to the town meeting. The second piece is that from time to time, there may be a debt exclusion, capital exclusion, or even an override on the election ballot. And the thought is that if you have the town meeting first, it gives you a great forum for the community to come in and to debate the merits of the questions, get more information out there, and for the community to become better acquainted with the reasons, the consequences of doing it, the consequences of not doing it. So these two things together have, in my opinion, some real merit. And the other thing that they do by moving the town meeting back just a little bit is it gives us a little more time to work on the budget. We don't know what we're getting for state aid when we put a budget together. We have a guess. It's usually a pretty good guess. We often don't know what we're getting for an assessment from the schools. And so a little more time to work on the budget towards the tail end, even if it's just a week or two, can really help improve the assumptions that we're operating under and give us a better developed, sounder, more reliable budget.
It'll be really very interesting to see what people think of this at the special town meeting, because I know it's been talked about for years. We've debated whether to have the election before or after, and I think some years it's gone back and forth. And having town meeting and deciding if we want to switch it back to a Tuesday night, because I know there's been a lot of comments about Saturday and whether we should.
There's been a lot of comments about Saturday, and I'm a data guy. And when you see the numbers and you see the drop, I think folks will understand better the reasons for this.
Mm-hmm. And the final article concerns the Cable TV Advisory Committee, and I'm, in the spirit of objectivity, I will take a pass on this and let you explain anything.
Sure.
Would you like me to recuse myself?
No. But let me carry the water here to try to keep you neutral on this issue. Last year, we did establish the cable fund as an enterprise fund. It's putting it on a business basis. And at the time, with that meeting with the Department of Revenue, there was only about $85,000 in the account to appropriate. And because it was the first year, the Department of Revenue didn't want us to appropriate any more to the Cable Committee. Since then, we have signed the contract with the cable company to spell out exactly what they're going to give the town each year, both in terms of annual revenues and a one-time capital grant. That cash can be relied upon. NDOR has said, okay, based upon that, you can appropriate this additional money. And it's the capital money we really want to get at so that we can improve the studio and the equipment and have better public access. They've been working on some rules for that. And I will let you make your argument on that in the document that we're going to circulate out to people.
Yeah, and if I may just add one point to that, these monies are used for the cable TV station and cable-related activities.
That's right. That's right. And in the near future, with this additional equipment that can be lent out, we're hoping that more members of the public will do community-based programming.
So that's it. We got through all 16 articles in about an hour, Carter. Do you think we can do that at town meeting?
Well, I did try in my first town meeting with you a time-saving touch, which didn't go over too big. Many communities have moved to to waive the reading of the article and approve the article as published. That was not well received. We're certainly not going to try that again. I do expect there to be some spirited debate, as there should be. And I'm hopeful that we can, by getting information out to folks, make that informed debate and to move it through. This really is the once, twice, thrice a year where we ask folks to come and to be an active participant in their town government.
Okay. Anything to add?
Well, I just want to remind folks that you can't just come and show up. You certainly, well, strike that. You certainly can just show up. But if you're not a registered voter, you're not going to be able to vote. And that's the major reason to be there. So the town clerk registering to vote up until 8 p.m. Thursday evening, November 2nd. We will I'll be putting together over the next few days for review by the selectmen this coming Monday a package of what are the warrant articles, what's it all about, kind of what you were kind enough to do with me here, what are the consequences of it passing, what are the consequences of it not passing. We'll have that up on the web within a week, certainly by November 7 or 8. But in the meantime, if people have a question about an article, send me an email directly, townadministrator@templeton1.org. Use our drop-down box on the website, general inquiries. Or come by the office. I'm here Mondays, Tuesdays, and Wednesdays. Just come on by. We'll do our best to find a few moments, get you on your way, and get you the answer to any questions that you might have.
And again, the fall town meeting, not special because it's not so special anymore, but the fall town meeting is November 14th at 7 p.m. at the Safka Auditorium in the Narragansett Middle School.
Thank you for your time, Steve.
Thank you, Carter. We hope to see you there.